Nemo Radio is on the air.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only. Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
Hey, it's John Nemo. Welcome back to another episode of Nemo Radio. We are going to take a deep dive today on sales. And this is one of my favorite topics on earth. If you followed me for any amount of time, you know how passionate I am about sales. And as part of the revised and updated version of LinkedIn Riches, my main book that I wrote all the way back in 2014, and then I have revised and updated it over the years, and now the new edition is out in print, in Kindle, and audiobook. So you can get it on Amazon, any of those options. The audiobook is obviously on Audible as well, and then the print and Kindle are on Amazon too. But I've more than doubled the size of the previous edition of LinkedIn Riches, including the audiobook. And one of the big sections that I paid a lot of attention on was specifically around sales. That has been one challenge that so many of our clients come to us with is, how do I close sales? How do I price my services? How do I know what to say on a sales call? Because obviously, the core focus of what we do is Nemo Media Group. We run a done-for-you LinkedIn lead generation service, and you can learn all about that if you like at nemomediagroup.com. But one of the things we've added over the years as we've worked with so many different clients, small business owners, consultants, franchise consultants, business coaches, accountants, bookkeepers, CPAs, you name it, people in every imaginable niche and B2B landscape. One of the things we've really done to help a lot of our clients is provide sales training, sales frameworks, sales psychology, sales scripts, methodologies. And this section, which I'm going to share on the podcast today, comes from the LinkedIn Riches audiobook, which is really what I define as the secret to successful sales. So let's dive in. Chapter 7, The Secret to Successful Sales. Now, this one might surprise you because it's not about certain frameworks or scripts or strategies. It's about a different letter S word. It's all about self-confidence. Self-confidence is everything. Confidence is contagious. So let me give you a great quote from a book, How to Have Confidence and Power in Dealing with People by Les Giblin. Amazing book. He said, "It's a sad but true fact that there are many men of mediocre ability who get further than others that have more outstanding talents merely because these men know how to act confidently." That's so true. And then this is another one. He says, "A confident manner in a salesperson is like having money in the bank. More importantly, your prospects will begin to have more confidence in you." He says, "I've seen mediocre salespeople make a good record because they knew how to act and talk in a confident manner. And I've seen salespeople who apparently knew all the answers about theoretical salesmanship fail miserably because they did not have this knack of displaying a confident manner." And Les Giblin goes on to say, "We instinctively like the person who knows what he or she wants and acts if he or she expects to get it. People don't like doubters. They don't like failures. They don't like uncertainty. If you want people to like you, you have to let them know you expect to win." So if you think about it, like if you're not confident in your product or service, why would a prospect be? So when somebody will ask me on a sales call, well, what if this doesn't work? I will put it back on the prospect, not on myself. And I have a great example. I'll say this. I'll say, okay, well, say they're a franchise consultant, because off the top of my head, this is a good one that I have. I'll say, okay, well, you're a franchise consultant, so let me give you an explanation. We've worked with dozens of franchise consultants. In the last 12 months, and this is true, real numbers, they say our best franchise consultant has done over $760,000 in sales from us, from leads we've sourced on LinkedIn, just in the last 12 months. I have another franchise consultant that's done zero sales in 12 months from the leads we sourced on LinkedIn. In each case, we've used the exact same strategy, exact same approach to their LinkedIn profile, exact same quality of content that we created, exact same messaging strategy, exact same lists of types of prospects, so same kind of fishing ponds, exact same amount of calls booked or close to. They've both had about the same amount of opportunities and sales calls. One has closed $760,000 in business. One has closed zero. So, whose fault is it? Basically, listen, the only reason this doesn't work, I'm putting it back on the prospect, right? The only time this doesn't work is if you can't close the leads. right? It's not, you want to always take that leverage back because it's a great way to remind the prospect, listen, I'm vetting you as much as you're vetting me. So think about this. If you're a business coach, do you want a new client who, either writes down everything you say and takes immediate action, implements everything you want them to do? Or do you want a client who kind of comes and shows up week after week saying, this isn't working, but then they don't do anything, right? They don't take any action. The first client's a dream for you, correct? The second one is just going to drain you and drain your energy and probably will ask for a refund or go online and bash you. And I also say this on sales calls too. I will go back to the prospect and say, listen, I can't win with losers. I want to pick winners for clients. I think you're a winner. Here's why I think you're a winner. This. And I will pump their tires and I will find legitimate things I authentically believe about them that, look at your background, look at what you've accomplished. You've built a really good platform. You've got a ton of great things we can leverage. You're a winner. I pick winners. And this comes back to the secret to successful sales, which is confidence, insane self-confidence. So how do you develop that? Because most people don't just wake up feeling ultra confident. So I got you covered. I'll explain how you can do that. There's a great line from Alex Hormozzi in one of his books where he says, in the real world, to have the gonads to charge big ticket prices, you must outwork your self-doubt. You must be so confident in your delivery because you have done it so many times that you know this person will succeed. And the whole point of that is if you've done the work often enough and if you're continually improving your product or service as a result, and if you focus on the winning clients who do get great results, you will see that success does leave clues for you. That should give you confidence to feel certain that, listen, I will hold up my end of the bargain. I have been doing this for this long. I have this many clients that have gotten great results. It's more on you, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, to be the right type of client for me to get the best outcome. Now, what if you're just starting out? What if this is brand new? What if you don't have a big track record and tons of success and many years, to build confidence around? Well, it's really simple. Just believe in yourself. Easier said than done, but it's true. I had to start somewhere. I didn't immediately just wake up and have a 7-figure business on LinkedIn and insane confidence. I still remember the first time I ever landed a done-for-you LinkedIn lead generation client for 5 figures. I mean, how could I forget? I didn't have the service prior to that. There's always a first time, right? And so I remember prior to that day, I didn't have a done-for-you service. I didn't have a bunch of testimonials. I didn't have a bunch of case studies. I had never charged anyone 5 figures for a service, and nowhere near close to this price I was quoting that prospect. In addition, I had no track record, nothing I could point at as proof to show this prospect, but I did have something really important to leverage, which was myself. I knew I personally would not let this client down. I knew I would do everything in my power to get this client wins, especially at that price point. Remember, I'm charging that much. I'm going to pull out all the stops. I'm going to find all the resources. I'm going to bring in anyone and anything I need to get you wins. And I told that prospect as much. I'm like, I will not let this fail. And my confidence on that call was contagious. So they signed on, right? At that stage, I really didn't have to show or prove I could deliver. It was really just using my own story, my own journey with LinkedIn, and then insane self-confidence. And it's been interesting to me because now years later, I can get on a sales call and I can show someone, oh yeah, here's all my social proof. Here's all the case studies. Here's all the testimonials. Here's all the logic of how I've helped people just like you make 5- and 6-figure sales from leads on LinkedIn, and people still won't sign up. Wait, what? And they won't buy. They'll make up some surface level excuse, but it's always an emotional reason deep down that stops people from signing up. So maybe, just maybe, calling myself out here, maybe I didn't have the same enthusiasm and self-confidence on this sales call as I used to. Or maybe I, didn't bring it that day. Maybe I was being too clinical, too factual, too matter of fact. Maybe I wasn't excited and passionate, and that's also contagious. Kind of like, whatever. But if I look back at my earliest days doing done-for-you sales, when I had no track record, no case studies, no fancy website, none of that, I just had this contagious level of self-confidence. And that was enough. Confidence is contagious. You can really communicate that to people, especially through a Zoom call where they can see your face and you're like, I will not let you fail. I'm going to pull out all the stops. I'm like the little dog that will keep biting your ankle till I'm dead. I will find a way to get you wins. That's what I do. That's how I roll, right? It's a lesson I would do well to remember, and that you as well, is that people buy based on emotion. We will, of course, always later go back to justify a purchase with logic, but we always buy based on how we feel. Period. End of story. It even will work in reverse when you're trying to sell a product or service. So I recently had a call with a prospect who I later realized after the fact, I really didn't want to work with this person. They were giving off a lot of red flags in the call. The emotional vibe was not good. And in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I knew they would be a nightmare client if I signed them on. Now, however, in the heat of the moment in the sales call, again, my Minnesota Nice took over, the Midwestern, passive aggressive. Like, I couldn't just say, dude, you seem like a really whatever, and I don't want to work with you, eject, right? I didn't know how to extricate myself, so I just sat there for an hour, and I kept talking. I felt obligated to keep trying to sell, and it was really interesting because the person kept going, and I was like, ugh. And it was funny, at the end of the call, the person basically said to me, yeah, you just don't seem super confident that this will work, John. So how am I supposed to feel confident, and trust you to do this project if you don't seem confident about it? And the sale, of course, didn't happen. And I realized now after the fact, I was subconsciously tanking the sale, right? I didn't want this person as a client. So I dialed down my confidence to like negative levels because I subconsciously wanted a no answer. Instead of me just being direct and being like, you know what? I don't think you'd be a good fit for us. There's many reasons for that. I don't want to waste your time. Thanks so much for the time. Best of luck. I couldn't do that. So I just sat there and kind of, went through the call on a like flat line without any confidence because I was hoping they would say no, which is what happened. So that's really interesting. Something to be aware of. Confidence being contagious. You've got to find ways to build it. Obviously, there's lots of work you can do with mindset. I can talk about that later. I've got lots of thoughts on that. But that's the key thing, is find a way to bring confidence to those calls. Now, I want to talk really briefly about how to handle objections, because when it comes to selling, you're always going to run into objections, of course. So I'm going to share here in this section the most common objections I've run into. Frankly, all of us are going to run into some sort of objections like this, and then basically you can take them and adapt them to your own situation. Remember this too, like your style of selling should fit your personality and your brand. Don't copy me, don't copy anyone else. Be yourself, like find what feels comfortable. I think you realize by now my brand, I'm kind of a goofball, right? Like a lot of humor, a lot of fun, a lot of personality. If you're a huge introvert, that's not your style, then don't try to fake it. So again, the key thing though is to remember how you present your brand, your content, what personality you put into it on the front end. That should be matched in your sales process. So as you grow, as you build your business, if you've got a sales team, be cognizant of what's our brand, what's the vibe that we give off as a company, what's our content feel like. For example, if you came through the LinkedIn Riches audiobook and you wanted to talk to somebody at Nemo Media Group, let's say not me, right, but a salesperson, if that person came on and they were super aggressive and shouting at you and putting you down, like you'd be like, whoa, like this does not feel at all like the Nemo Media Group vibe. Like, where's the fun guy with the popcorn bucket, right? So make sure it matches. Make sure if you outsource your sales or hire salespeople, they need to fit your brand, your company culture, your vibe, so that people don't have this kind of confusion when they get on it. And let me explain that a little bit, because I made this mistake early on when I opened my business. I thought, because I didn't know any better, I thought, well, I have to copy what successful people are doing. So I'm going to copy word for word the copywriting, the strategies, the sales tactics of these gurus online. And it just always felt inauthentic, and it felt uncomfortable, and it wasn't how I was in real life. And people would always say to me, like, once they got to know me, like, that doesn't, the copy you sent out doesn't feel like you, right? Or what you wrote there, or your sales page, or whatever. And I realized that, like, yeah, as I've said before, your biggest advantage in today's marketplace is you. It's your unique story, your unique personality, communication style, everything else. So you've really got to just step into that and embrace it. So with all that said, let's get into understanding how to deal with these objections and really where to go with it. So what I love about Chris Voss in his book, Never Split the Difference, he talks about how leverage really lives below the literal. So he says people's emotions have two levels: the presenting behavior, the part above the surface you can see and hear, and then beneath is the underlying feeling that motivates the behavior. And Voss says a trap many people fall into is to take what the other person is saying literally. Ooh. That's me. I've learned that the hard way. Taking what they're saying literally as far as objections. And Voss says, I started to see that while people played the game of conversation, it was in the game beneath the game where few played that all the leverage lived. So to summarize that idea, all the leverage lives below the literal. You have to go beyond what people are saying. So here's an example. I once had a prospect tell me, John, I want to work with you so badly on this project. I simply can't afford it. I literally cannot pay for this. I was like, oh, okay. Well, on the same call, that prospect told me about how he was going to take a huge month-long vacation all over Europe with his spouse, and he was going to travel all over and do all these cool events. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You could do this huge month-long, VIP level trip to Europe, but you can't afford a LinkedIn service? Like, huh? Right, it was obvious that, he was not serious, right? He was saying literally, I can't afford it, while at the same time gearing up for his European vacation. So again, this is a common objection you're going to hear. People are going to say, I can't afford it. Or they're going to say, I wish I could do this. I can't pay for it. I literally don't have the funds. Now, if you want to be the aggressive type, you can say, really? You literally don't have the funds. So you've never heard of credit cards. You've never heard of bank loans. You've never heard of funding sources. I obviously am not that guy. I'm not going to be that guy and be that big of a jerk. The reality is, though, if somebody really wants something, they figure out a way to pay for it. That's why we're all in debt. That's why we all have credit card debt. We buy stuff that we don't have money for because we want it emotionally. That's why you take out a loan to buy a house. You literally cannot afford to pay cash for a house, but you take out a loan and pay back with interest, correct? Because you really want a house. So it's, that's not a real objection when they say, I can't afford it. If you want something bad enough, you figure out how to pay for it. So the point here simply is you can't take what they say literally. Now, if someone says, I can't afford it or I can't pay for it, I will poke into that. And I'll find a polite or humorous way to do it. I'll say, well, this might sound silly. Do you not use credit cards? Or what's your thought on that? Then you peel away a layer of the onion, because sometimes people will say, oh, no, I never use credit cards for something like this. Oh, and then I'll say, wow, good for you. That's amazing. I wish I would have known you when I started out my business and I was $60,000 in debt on credit cards, and I'll laugh. And let's say, so tell me that, what's the story behind that? Why do you never use credit cards? Now you're going to get somewhere, because they're going to get into their psychology, and they're going to say, well, I grew up, my parents were always in debt. They were always fighting about the credit card bill. It was such a big stressful thing. I made a vow growing up, I will never have credit card debt. So to this day, I will not pay for something unless I have money in hand to buy it right here, right now. Oh, okay. Well, that's something then, that's good to know as the real objection, because there is a story behind that situation. There is a passion behind that philosophy that you're going to have a hard time overcoming. Unless you want to go into their childhood trauma and psychology about mom and dad fighting over the credit card bill, that's going to be a tough one to win. So you've got to figure out how to ask more questions. And this is where it gets into sales is really therapy sometimes. Seriously, sales is really therapy. I'm telling you, if you act like a therapist, if you can poke and prod and kind of politely get people to open up, you will get to the core issue, and oftentimes you can resolve it and get the deal done. Again, do not ask why questions. As I mentioned before, those feel like an accusation. They can put people on the defensive. Instead, ask what or how type questions. So instead of, why don't you ever use credit cards? You want to say something like, wow, good for you. I can really respect that type of discipline with finances. So how did you come up with that approach? What spurred you to kind of go down that road? That's pretty unique, at least as far as I know. Again, that will get them opening up. They'll feel comfortable. You'll get the emotional reason behind the objection, and then you can do something with that. That's the key. For example, people are going to be wired differently. Maybe it's something from their childhood. Maybe they've made a bad investment or a bad decision, and they still feel stung by it. They don't trust themselves, and then out of that pain, they'll never do it again. Now, there's people like me where it's a total opposite approach. I have this story where I quit a safe 6-figure day job. I had one client, enough money for 30 days and no savings. Plus my wife is at home with our 3 young boys. That just sounds nuts to a lot of you listening right now, correct? But not if you grew up in my shoes. And the reason I came up with that approach, the story behind that strategy, what spurred me to think that way is really simple. My dad died when I was 17. I saw him battle cancer from the time I was 7 until he died when I was a senior in high school. And seeing the most important person in my life suffer and then die, the guy who was the total glue of our family, that left a lasting impression on me. And once he died, I realized as a 17-year-old kid, I'm like, why am I playing it so safe in life? To that point in my life, I was a huge kind of introvert. I kind of hid. I was afraid to let my real personality out. I was scared of what other people would think of me. I didn't speak up even though I really wanted to, and I was afraid, right? I don't want to stand out too much. And I realized after my dad died, I'm like, geez, I could wake up tomorrow and have cancer. I could get hit by a bus. Bleep it. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to take my shot. What's the worst that can happen to me? I have seen the worst possible thing happen in my life, which to that point was my dad dying. What am I afraid of? I'm going to go for it, and that shaped me for the rest of my life. I went from this shy, soft-spoken, nervous kid to somebody who's like, sure, I'll take the shot. I'm willing to go for it. And I did, right? And that's why I could make that leap to do what I did to start my business. And I'm not here to say my approach is right or another approach is wrong. It's more just you got to understand why people are the way they are. If you can figure out what makes someone tick deep down at the emotional level, it's much easier to close deals as a result.